Hello and welcome to the March edition of the Francis Humphrey Lecture Series, both in person and on Zoom. Today we have the pleasure of inviting Lynn Downey here to speak about her new book. Lynn Downey is an award-winning Western historian, novelist, and consulting archivist. She is the author of Levi Strauss, The Man Who Gave Blue Jeans to the World, and spoke about her book at the museum in 2017. This is kind of funny. I mentioned this in our staff meeting the other day. I said, Lynn Downey's coming. And one of the curators said, is she the Levi one? I'm like, yes, she is. Yes. Although she isn't a horsewoman, she visits dude ranches often. She is also proud to say that members of her family lived in Sparks for many years in the early 20th centuries, and they are buried in Wadsworth. So please help me welcome Lynn Downey.
Thank you, Mina. Thank you, everyone. We're getting wired for sound here for our folks on Zoom. Thank you. Thank you all so much, all you Thursday night history buffs. I so appreciate you coming out tonight. And thank you also to everybody there on Zoom. Whenever I do these webinars, sometimes I do these from my house and it's just me talking to the screen. I always feel like Gloria Swanson at the end of Sunset Boulevard and thinking about all those wonderful people out there in the dark, So thank you for all you lovely people out there in the dark. So thank you all very much for coming so I can talk about my newest obsession, which is actually an obsession I've had for quite a while, even when I was still with Levi Strauss & Co. I left the company in 2014 to become a consulting archivist, but I will never not have denim following me wherever I go. So that's just the way it is. But what I discovered as I started thinking about doing this book is, whoops, we're not moving. We're not clicking. Please hold. That it's, there we go. Okay, is it? Okay, good, all right. So I'm the perfect person to write about dude ranches because I am a dudine. This is my first time on a horse. I'm the freaked out blonde on the back of Ginger here. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in the 50s and 60s, my uncle raised quarter horses in his backyard in El Sobrante, California, if anybody knows where that is. That's near Richmond. And my cousin Chuck here, later on, oops, okay. That's the kid in the previous picture. This is my cousin Chuck, who was a bulldogger and calf roper on the rodeo circuit in the 60s and 70s. Did I learn how to ride? No. I did not get the horse gene, despite growing up around horses and cowboys and everything else. What I got was the love of Western history gene. And that became my reading life and my school life and then my profession. So that's what I took from childhood, was a fascination with the West. And then thanks to my work at Levi Strauss & Co., I discovered the history of the dude ranch. I started working there in 1989 and I was organizing their catalogs, and I came across this catalog called Dude Ranch Duds. And I knew what a dude ranch was. And so this is from 1938. And I went through it and looked through it. And what this is a catalog of clothing specifically for people to wear on dude ranches. And it's not only just the basic jeans and jackets, but satin rodeo shirts with, contrasting piping and embroidered cowboy shirts and tight gabardine pants and, all the kind of clothes no real cowboy would wear. But they're going to wear them on the dude ranch. And I got really interested in the history of dude ranching, and I started to study it as part of my job so I could understand the role that Levi Strauss played in the world of dude ranching. So then I started to collect dude ranch memorabilia, and I'm not obsessed or anything, but I have over 100 pieces of dude ranch memorabilia in my house. Yes, I'm an archivist, and it's nicely organized. Trust me. So what I realized when I decided I wanted to write this book, and what I wanted to do was look at the dude ranch from a cultural point of view. This is not a book that profiles the history of individual ranches, But I saw that dude ranching was part of everything about American life, food and clothing and movies, the role of women. And that's the story I wanted to tell. So dude ranching is a unique vacation with no parallel anywhere else. And that's the story I tell in the book. So as a matter of fact, dude ranching is 140 years old this year, 2022. It really began when, of course, you can't have ranching, anything with the word ranch in it, without cattle. So, of course, cattle ranches are springing up through the Rocky Mountain West. And then a lot of rich English and Irish aristocrats would come out to the American West to shoot various animals and take back all kinds of trophies. And the cattlemen in these areas would host these aristocrats in their home, and they would feed them and give them a place to stay. And that sort of word kind of got around. Well, in the early 1880s, three brothers from Pittsburgh, the Eaton brothers, had a ranch near Medora, North Dakota, the Custer Trail Ranch. And they started hosting these guys, these hunters. And then in 1882, they all looked at each other and they said, we're not making any money off these guys. These guys are eating into our cattle profits. So they bought a guest book in 1882 and started charging, I believe it was $10 a week for these guys to stay at their ranch when they went on their hunting trips. And that is the genesis of the Dude Ranch. Now, Teddy Roosevelt in 1883 bought a ranch nearby called the Maltese Cross Ranch. And then he came out again in 1884 after the tragedy of his wife and his mother dying on the same day. He came out west to heal himself from his grief and visited the Eatons at their Custer Trail Ranch and actually signed their guest book, which is pretty exciting. Howard Eaton, the patriarch of the group, like everybody else, really liked Teddy Roosevelt, really respected him, but he was a dude. And Howard Eaton later talked about how Teddy loved to wear buckskins, but they were really inconvenient if they got wet. But Teddy kept wearing his buckskins. So Eaton's is starting to host all these guys. And then by 1903, the Eaton brothers said, we can make a living just hosting these people at our home. And so they left North Dakota and moved to Wolf, Wyoming in 1903. In 1904, they opened Eaton's exclusively as a dude ranch, no cattle ranching at all. And that is literally the very first dude ranch, and they're still in business today in Wolf, Wyoming. It's amazing. So is anybody watching The Gilded Age on HBO? Oh my God. Oh, okay, that's another subject. Anyway, the rich men that you see in that show are the kind of men who would have left the East to come out west to go to Eaton's for a dude ranch vacation, an early or a hunting vacation. Because not only were these English and Irish aristocrats coming, the word had gotten out back east. And so rich men from New York and Connecticut, Pennsylvania, were coming out, taking the train out and staying at these ranches and staying at Eaton's, of course. So the idea was they would leave the East behind. And even though the West wasn't wild anymore, they could still have a truly Western kind of vacation. And it was also turning into a dude ranch, turning into the kind of place where nervous mothers would send their sons from back east because maybe they're drinking too much and they're falling into, wild lifestyles. And they'd send them out to Eaton's to like sober them up and dry them out and cowboy them up so they could become men out west. And then they'd go home and, be good, honest citizens. So that's the kind of thing, the kind of thing that was happening. The West was becoming the place where that could happen. And the dude ranches were the places where these were happening. And a couple of others started to open up in the Rocky Mountains after Eaton's in Wolf. There was the OTO in Gardner, Montana, and then later, 1915, the Valley Ranch outside of Cody. These are the three founding ranches, dude ranches of the time. So by about 1912, the term dude ranch was in the lexicon. It had been coined by somebody that nobody knows who in about the 1890s. And then by 1912, this poem was printed in a number of American papers. And it has, my favorite line is, "It is now the cowboy's province to herd the festive dude," because it's lamenting the loss of the cowboy way of life. And now they're just herding these, these people from the East. And by this time, women were also joining their husbands and coming out for a dude ranch vacation, which was still pretty rustic and still pretty rough. But it was becoming the kind of place where women could go. Now, the word dude has a very old history. It's from an Old English word, dudus, which actually meant clothes, and where we get the word duds, like Dude Ranch Duds. By the time it crossed the Atlantic and started to be used in the United States, it became the word dude, and it didn't refer to clothing anymore, but it referred to the kind of man who was wearing the clothing, and it meant not very manly clothing. And it's one of those words that, etymologists, is that the bug one or the word one? I can never get those straight. Thank you. Are not quite sure how it happened, but it really rose up again in the 1880s because Easterners and Americans were getting nervous about what was going on back east. Waves of immigrants were coming in, and railroads were taking over farmland, and cities were growing up, and people were nervous that America was, didn't have its Wild West anymore. So it was the perfect time, of course, for Buffalo Bill to debut his Wild West in Nebraska in 1883. So the dude became the symbol of what was wrong with America. Fancy men who never did a hard day's work in their life and wearing these weird looking clothes. So it was kind of a pejorative. But the people who were now opening dude ranches, to them, the word dude just meant a stranger, someone from another part of the country come to take a Western vacation. So it was not a pejorative for the people who were using that word as part of their business. So the first ranches were mostly in the Rocky Mountain West, but they have to be closed during the winter. So what happens? Whoops, here we go. People in Arizona said, hey, we can open up ranches in the winter. We can get all those snowbirds to come down here and come to our ranches. So Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico started opening up dude ranches about the time of World War I. And something else started to happen. Rich Easterners who were used to going to Europe every year couldn't go to Europe between 1914 and 1918 because of World War I. So instead of going across the Atlantic, they looked west and started going to dude ranches. And the word really began to spread. And some of the ranchers had very sophisticated ways of advertising. The owner of the Valley Ranch in Cody, who was from New York, had an office in New York, and he had brochures printed, and he had an office where he would, recruit people to, come and stay at his ranch. And the other thing that helped was that railroads, northern railroads, southwestern railroads, started to get in on the craze for dude ranching. They knew they'd make a lot more money with tourists than they would with freight. And they started printing up these beautiful brochures to get people to come out to dude ranches. So this kind of a brochure, it would have a state-by-state listing of every single dude ranch in the state, how to contact it, what kind of activities you could do, and every kind of railroad line, the Northern Pacific, the Burlington Northern, the Southern Pacific, would do these beautiful brochures and help bring people out. And before people really started buying cars and driving, certainly during and then after World War II, a lot of these ranches are remote. So you take the train to the closest city, and then they'd have to come and pick you up from the dude ranch in the horse and wagon originally, and then maybe, a truck or a car. So railroads and dude ranches were like this. And those two dude ranchers and the railroads got together in 1926 to found the Dude Ranchers Association, the DRA, which is basically the trade organization for dude ranching. It helped standardize practices. People shared marketing ideas, and it was one of those a rising tide lifts all boats kind of organization. So it was becoming a business by about the late 20s and early 30s. So a lot of ranches also started to do their own advertising. And Kurt Teich, the man and the company that created the famous greetings from, every state postcards. I love this one, it's awesome. He was one of the people who would print postcards. So some of the dude ranches printed their own postcards, but there also were these sort of generic dude ranch postcards that they would carry at the dude ranch. They would be in railroad stations, they'd be in train stations, they'd be in travel agencies. So there was this, and this was the Dude Ranchers Association and the railroads working to get a lot of people, out west. And then there was, so Kurt Teich also created a whole line in the 1930s called Dude Ranch Comics. This is one of the creepy ones from the 1930s. I can't even look at this card sometimes because it's just really creepy. And it says having a wonderful season at the ranch, and he's like touching her way too much. But anyway, this is a play on a very interesting trope that began to show up both in movies and in films and was happening in real life. Eastern women go to a dude ranch and they marry a cowboy once they get there. And then after a couple of years, they realize, what have I done? And they go back east. But that didn't always happen. There were some very successful marriages of dudines, by the way, is the female version of dude, and local wranglers. But this is, one of the Dude Ranch comics, and they're all pretty fun. So Nevada, of course, has a unique history in dude ranches. There were certainly plenty of them, many in the Washoe Valley. Pyramid Lake Dude Ranch was one of the most famous. But of course, one of the other groups of people that used to come to Nevada dude ranches after 1931 were those in search of a divorce. Prior to 1929, in the state of Nevada, I think that there was a 3-month residency requirement. If you stayed here for 3 months, you could get a quickie divorce. Well, in 1931, the state not only legalized gambling, it set a 6-week residency requirement to get a divorce. You would come out here and you would get, and it was almost all of it was in Reno, but you would get renovated. You would leave the East and come out to Reno, and you'd stay at a dude ranch for your 6 weeks. And if you wanted to, you could leave the ranch and go into town and gamble or do whatever. But there were a lot of famous people who came out here to get divorces, and they wanted some privacy, and they would just stay on the dude ranch, for that 6 weeks. So Pyramid Lake was one of the most famous. And one of the places I did my research was historic newspapers that are all available online. Just enter Dude Ranch in the subject line, and you would get, I would spend whole weekends in my jammies, in front of my computer doing this Dude Ranch research. So one day I found this headline: Hoosier tires of yoga and wants his dude ranch back. Okay, what is that about? So this was the headline in the Indianapolis News of November 26, 1947. Alva LaSalle Beau Kitzelman was the heir to a big steel and wire fortune, Indiana fortune. And in 1936, he came out to Nevada and he bought the Pyramid Lake Ranch for about $67,000 in 1936. And he was a very introspective, very analytical man who discovered yoga after he moved out here. And he outfitted his dude ranch with a special cabin with a special light. And he would spend hours every day meditating in his special cabin on his dude ranch. And he did that for like 4 years. And other people were running his ranch, and he was just doing his yoga thing. And so about 1940, he started doing that. And then in 1947, like years later, his interest kind of waned. And to his horror, when he became, as he called it, lucid, he realized that he had signed over the dude ranch to his mother and his sister and didn't remember doing it. Although now he was lucid, and now he wanted his dude ranch back, and they wouldn't give it back. So he sued his mother and sister in court here in Nevada in December of 1947. And he took the stand, and psychiatrists talked about how he was unbalanced, and he would talk for hours about yoga. He lost his case in 1948, and he even appealed it in 1951, but the verdict was upheld, and his mother and his sister kept the dude ranch. And then later, I believe it was the Drackerts who later bought Pyramid Lake Dude Ranch and kept and really raised its profile for years. And then Beau Kitzelman, he sort of was one of those people who just wanted to try different kinds of religions, and actually in the 1950s became an early computer coder. So he just sounds like a fascinating, kind of goofy, but very fascinating person, which I find so interesting that he has this dude ranch, relation. The Pyramid Lake Dude Ranch was where Arthur Miller stayed when he was getting his divorce before he married Marilyn Monroe. Ava Gardner was here. This is an early shot of the Flying ME, and there was also the TH Ranch, Donner Trail, Washoe Pines Ranch. A lot of them were dude ranches, and people would come for vacations, but there was also these, future divorcees. One of them was Consuelo Vanderbilt Smith, who was the granddaughter of James G. Fair, one of the Comstock millionaires. And then one of the other Vanderbilts, Cornelius Vanderbilt Jr., who I think was her uncle, but I can't keep the Vanderbilt straight. He lived here prior to the 1931 law, and he wrote this book about what was called the divorce colony. And it's just a book called Reno. And people back east were appalled because he wrote about everybody he knew who'd, come out to Reno to get a divorce. He owned that ranch for quite a while. So there's wonderful connections to the east and wonderful, connections to Hollywood just through the humble Nevada dude ranch, which is a part of the story I do cover in the book. So movies also took up the topic of the divorce ranch, beginning this is 1938, The Road to Reno. Dude ranching had started getting film treatment as early as a silent in 1919 called Wrangling Dudes. And then there were plenty of stories about, effete Easterner comes west, stays at a dude ranch, mans up and wins the local dudeen. That's sort of the standard plot. The standard plot of the divorce ranch story was usually the comedy of errors, confusion. Couple thinks they want a divorce. One of them goes to Reno. The other one realizes they still love the other one. They come out to find the other one, hilarity ensues, So that was basically The Road to Reno. There was also Vacation in Reno from 1947. Jack Haley looking not quite right in cowboy shirts. And then in 1985, Desert Hearts was the story from a woman's point of view. And it's set in the 1950s. And there's a lot of really wonderful cultural history in this movie. I really love this film. Again, it's the woman's point of view. But for my money, the best movie of all that treats the story of the Nevada divorce ranch is The Women from 1930. I see nodding heads. Thank you. Yes. From 1939. The best. So if you don't know the plot, a number of New York women who in their everyday life are wearing Adrian gowns in their New York homes. A few of them get on the train for Reno to, stay at I can't remember the name of the ranch, this Nevada ranch outside of Reno, run by Lucy, played by Marjorie Main, Ma Kettle. Oh yes. And so Rosalind Russell shows up later, and she shows up and they're bringing her in a wagon, and she pulls a English saddle out of the wagon, and Lucy, the proprietor, says, what's that dude contraption? And she says, that's an English saddle. I refuse point blank to learn to ride one of those Western things. And Lucy says to her, did you ever see a horse laugh? So the first thing these women do when they get to the ranch is to change the way they dress. So, of course, you're de rigueur to have your plaid cowboy shirt with your pearls and your leather gauntlets, as Mary Boland is here on the right. And if you're younger, you're Paulette Goddard, and you have your white leather gauntlets and the white linen hot pants with short, they look like beetle boots that she's wearing in 1939. And what this signifies to the viewer of this film is that these women are in alien territory. And when you went to a dude ranch, you did change the way you dressed. You had to in order to ride. A lot of the early visitors to dude ranches would bring their normal, English sort of kind of riding clothes, but it didn't take long for them to adopt jeans and cowboy shirts because it was more comfortable, and they would get into the rhythm of the dude ranch. But in the film, The Women, this tells, and everybody who's seeing this movie who maybe had a friend in 1939 who went to Reno, or they went to Reno, they understand they have to be a different kind of person for this 6 weeks. So they have to dress like this kind of person for this 6 weeks. So dude ranching helped move Western wear really into the mainstream. A lot of women wore denim for the very first time when they're on a dude ranch. And if it's the 30s and 40s and you're wearing a pair of Lady Levi's or a pair of men's 501 jeans, you are feeling pretty liberated when you're walking around in denim, which you cannot wear back in Manhattan or Connecticut or Philadelphia. So a lot of women, had that experience of this, it's like, again, alien territory and this moment in their lives when they had this liberation. So when I ran the archives for Levi's, I got a call one day because I used to buy vintage clothing for the collection. And I got a call from this woman who's in Macon, Georgia. And she said, I have my grandmother's jeans. She wore them in 1944 at an Arizona dude ranch. And she brought them home and she never wore them again. And I want to sell them to you for your archives. So of course I bought them. But I perfectly understood this woman's impulse. She wore these jeans for maybe a month on this dude ranch, and she took them home and of course never wore them again in Macon, Georgia in 1944, but she didn't get rid of them because every time she opened that drawer and saw that pair of jeans, she was reminded of that time when she got that feeling of liberation, of being able to wear something that women were not allowed to wear. And she was on a horse when she was doing it. And I loved that. I just loved that story about those jeans. And then a few years later, the same woman called me back and said, I'm with my family. We're in San Francisco. Can we come visit my grandmother's pants? Sure. So I brought them in and it was a lovely afternoon. So clothing moved from the dude ranch a little more mainstream. One item that became very popular beginning in the 40s was the unfortunately named squaw dress, which was either a skirt and a belt and a top, or sometimes just one all dress with a crinkly skirt, very, Navajo-ish. It was also called a patio dress, which, I prefer. But this is an ad for a Western wear store within a large clothing store. And a lot of big department stores would have just dude ranch departments. Bullock's Wilshire in Los Angeles, incredibly famous, the kind of department store that would close down at night so that Greta Garbo could come and do her shopping. That's Bullock's Wilshire. They had a dude ranch shop and they would put Bullock's Dude Ranch shop labels in their clothing. So this is the kind of thing that a special Western wear department would wear. Now, by the 1940s, more families were beginning to come to dude ranches. It was a little easier to get to, more people were buying cars, and merchandisers and dude ranchers themselves realized that, kids, wanted, something to relate to. So yes, this book of paper dolls is from my collection, and it's pretty wonderful. And there's clothing inside these paper dolls I would wear today. I mean, it's just great stuff. But this is an understanding that more families are coming to the dude ranch. Let's give the kids something so they could feel like they're really relating, and maybe give them some clothes that look like what mom and dad are wearing. But again, that sense that they're wearing something different because they're in a completely unique environment. So dude ranches had moved into literature. The first real novel about dude ranching was called Dude Ranch, by a Wyoming author named Carolyn Lockhart in 1921. And little by little, people took up the topic because by the 30s and by the 40s, even though the Depression was making it hard for dude ranches to stay in business, a lot of cattle ranches that had trouble staying in business in the 30s turned to dude ranching, and actually that helped them survive because there were still rich people that were able to come out and take vacations. Even though more middle-class families were coming, they still had that rich East Coast group, and they would come out and stay for weeks at a time, only at that ranch, and that's all they would do for like 1 or 2 months. So dude ranching is having a cultural force in the United States, and it's going into literature. So this novel, Death on a Dude Ranch, is from, I think, 1938. And it's funny, it's a murder mystery, and it literally could have taken place anywhere because the story, I mean, except there's, some horses and a little gunplay, but it really could have taken place anywhere. But the author wanted a dude ranch for her setting because that would have been popular. Then there's the sillier stuff like Cherry Ames. So Cherry Ames is the Nancy Drew of the nursing world. And there was this whole series. There was Cherry Ames, department store nurse, Cherry Ames, yachting nurse, Cherry Ames, I mean, it just went on and on and on. So yes, there was a dude ranch nurse. So there she is in her pristine nurse's uniform by the corral. She kills me. She helps solve, a problem and helps the dude ranch stay in business, and then moves on to her next, client when she's done. It's pretty funny. And in 1930, George Gershwin wrote the musical Girl Crazy. And the story was what was becoming like the classic plot. Young man, Danny Churchill, is living riotous living in New York, and his family owns an Arizona ranch. So his father ships him out to Arizona. So he has to work on the ranch and stop like running wild with a wild crowd and drinking too much. So what does he do when he gets to the ranch? He turns it into a dude ranch with entertainment, with riotous living and drinking. So what's that? And then in 1943, the movie version with Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, it's the same story, but they send Danny Churchill out. It's actually a boarding school. It's a Western boarding school, but the trope is still there. He's living a riotous life in New York, and then he comes to the school, and all the other boys are wearing jeans and basic jackets, and he shows up and he's got woolly Angora chaps and the weird like cowhide vest and the enormous hat. But by the end of the film, he has, he wins over Judy Garland, who's the local dudeen, and saves the school from going under by bringing in the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra to put on a huge rodeo extravaganza at the end of the film. So it's pretty wonderful. But it's that story, it's that idea, dude ranching is a great way to tell a story. You place your story on a dude ranch and you're going to get an audience. So I would be remiss in my responsibility as a historian if I did not tell you about Sally Rand's Nude Ranch. If you look closely at this slide, it looks like it says Sally Rand's Dude Ranch, but there's a line through the D in dude, and there's a letter N above that. Sally Rand was a fan dancer. She was a burlesque dancer. She was basically about a couple of steps above a stripper. And in 1933, she went to the Fort Worth Centennial and created an exhibit there, an attraction there called Sally Rand's Nude Ranch. And that's what the sign looked like, exactly like this. And she had a sort of a Western style building inside, like behind a barrier, and you paid your dime or whatever, and you'd go in, and there were women with a faux Western backdrop wearing cowboy hats, holsters, and boots. And that's it. Very popular. So then in 1939, the city of San Francisco decided it was going to be putting on the Golden Gate International Exposition on Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay to celebrate the opening of the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge in 1937. And they said to Sally Rand, come on down. So she opened up an even bigger extravaganza version of the Nude Ranch at the GGIE. And the building was like territorial style. It looked like it was, from New Mexico. A plank sidewalk and the whole thing, and you'd pay I think it was a quarter by then. And it was the same thing, women frolicking in the back and, fake shootouts and playing horseshoes. And I will admit, my 15-year-old father went to the fair and tried to get into the Nude Ranch, but they wouldn't let him because he was too young. But full disclosure, just saying. And a number of women who performed at the Nude Ranch went on to great careers in burlesque. But so having been part of Sally Rand's Nude Ranch was a big deal. And she went on and married a cowboy, and they moved to Montana, and they bought a ranch. And so she had this real Western life when she gave up her, the burlesque part of her life, which I love. So the Dude Ranch began to sort of fade away from films by about the 1950s, but television picked up the topic. There were a couple of Dude Ranch related stories on Death Valley days in the 1950s. And Spin and Marty from the Mickey Mouse Club, those of us, thank you, I see nodding heads again. It was sort of a boys' Dude Ranch, part of the Mickey Mouse Club. The Perry Mason episode called The Case of the Petulant Partner, Perry, Della, and Paul all stayed at the White Sun Guest Ranch in Palm Springs when they were down there solving a mystery and, solving a murder, and Perry getting somebody off, in the courtroom. And there are actual interiors of the guest ranch as part of the plot. And he tells his client, oh yes, we're staying out at White Sun. So who knows? I mean, product placement circa 1963, on the Perry Mason show. But one place where dude ranching did show up in films, even as it was sort of, going away in other topics was musicals. And Gene Autry was the man who brought music to the Dude Ranch movie. He first appeared with a very early credit in Old Santa Fe with Ken Maynard. And they wanted Ken Maynard to sing, but he couldn't sing and nobody liked him. So they found this guy named Gene Autry who could sing and play guitar. And he had a musical interlude and people went crazy for him. So Oh Susanna, Gold Mine in the Sky, and a couple of others. There were Dude Ranch plots that he was part of. And there was usually, a crime was about to happen or maybe did happen, and mistaken identity and all that kind of stuff. But there was always a musical interlude with Gene and then successive larger, bands of his that would sort of give the musical tone to the movie. And I often wonder if people who went to Dude Ranches and saw these films were disappointed because you did not get that at a Dude Ranch. I mean, every once in a while, if a Dude Ranch was near a large town, they could bring in maybe, a local band. Almost every Dude Ranch had a piano, and guests were encouraged to bring a guitar or, whatever, and they would all entertain themselves in the evenings. And that was part of this. I found a few postcards showing evening activities at Dude Ranches, and everybody's sitting around, they're playing cards, they're talking, maybe they're listening to the radio, maybe somebody's playing the piano. It was this sort of self-directed entertainment. So although I'm sure everybody would have loved Gene Autry to show up, that really was something that was only in films. But it did raise the profile of the Dude Ranch and had a lot of fun doing it. One of the women I interviewed for my book, she and her husband started a Dude Ranch in Colorado in the 1960s. And every Friday night, there was a square dance for the guests, and the staff would put on a talent show every Friday night. And I think there were probably a lot of other ranches, that did that same kind of thing. And so the music from Dude Ranches sort of made its way into suburbia like clothing did. This is from 1950, Dude Ranch dances. Is it Adolf Hoffner? I can't remember his name. But it's not the greatest Western swing in the world, I'm sure. I mean, it's not the Light Crust Doughboys or anything, but this is the kind of thing, if you want to have a Dude Ranch themed party in your suburban home, you have the right music. And people were beginning to do that. And one way people were doing that was with food. In 1931, the Dude Ranchers Association debuted its own magazine called The Dude Rancher. And there was a women's column called House Management. And it was really solid advice that the women owners of Dude Ranches would give each other about how to manage guests, whatever. But everybody acknowledged, next to the wrangler, the most important employee on that ranch was the cook. Because if your guests were not happy with their meals, they would go home and tell their friends, don't go to this ranch, we didn't eat well. So this is one of my personal favorite recipes. This is from 1943, Cowboy in a Sack. It's your basic English boiled pudding. I love down at the bottom, it says, can be served with lemon sauce or hard sauce. Of course, hard sauce is just whiskey, butter, and sugar. And so the Dude Rancher ran this recipe again in 1955 in an issue, but it only suggested serving the pudding with lemon sauce. And I think that's because certainly by the 1950s, oodles of kids were coming with their families to Dude Ranches, and they wanted to make sure, we have to have this stuff for the kids. We can't just be thinking about the adults wanting their hard sauce. But it was about, let's make this more accessible to families, and we'll just serve it with the lemon sauce. Because until the 1970s, no Dude Ranch served alcohol. If you wanted to be a member of the Dude Ranchers Association, you could not have a cocktail bar or serve alcohol. Guests could bring their own liquor and drink it in their cabins, but Dude Ranchers did not want to be bouncers. So there were no cocktail lounges or anything until I think the 60s or 70s at Dude Ranches. So I never heard any stories about things going wrong when the dudes were drinking in their own cabins, but that's the way the Dude Ranchers wanted it. So having the word Dude Ranch on your product continued to be, a great marketing tool. In the 1940s, a Long Beach company started putting out a line of preserves, and they called it Dude Ranch. Why? I don't know. But it was good marketing. And it was also, this is during the war. I think they debuted, I believe it was 1942 or 1944. And dude ranches were the kind of places that had to make do during the war, and they were still able to serve, their guests. So maybe the idea was, it's about being self-sufficient during wartime. So this is the marketing tool we're going to use and call our stuff, Dude Ranch Peach Preserves. And it was mostly, preserves and, jellies and jams. So I mentioned earlier that, not a lot of dude ranches had music, but in 1982, the Rimrock Dude Ranch near Yellowstone had they had a house band called the Rimrockers. So by the 1980s, if you know about, movies and film, interest in Westerns kind of goes like this. You see it anything Western shows up on TV or movies, it's kind of a roller coaster. And certainly by 1980, although Urban Cowboy had come out and everybody was all urban, oh my God, Urban Cowboy. There were no Western TV shows, by this time. And there was really a waning interest in the West. So the Rimrockers were, they all dressed like cowboys, and they're really entertaining there at the Dude Ranch. And the urban cowboy craze did give a bump to dude ranching, but there was a correlation between interest in the West and dude ranching. And they would see their business go up and down with that, that kind of interest. And so after 1980, they went along, okay, they limped along and they did well until 1991 when this happened. City Slickers, which is not a dude ranch movie. It's a cattle drive movie. The owner of the ranch at the beginning of the film says, this is not a fake, this is not a dude ranch, this is a real ranch. And yet everybody thinks of it as a dude ranch movie, and I know why. Now at the beginning, they spend a night at the ranch before they go on the cattle drive, and they get new clothes, and the ranch looks very dudish, but all the action is about these three guys from the East who are all having this midlife crisis, and they come west, and they have this trial by fire on this cattle drive, and they come out at the other end all put back together and healed. And that's exactly what the dude ranch experience was for so many people, what the Western experience was. So people think of it as a dude ranch movie because that's that theme that you see through early dude ranching, send your young man out west, and you see it in films and in books. And I really love it that people think it's a dude ranch movie. And when I was telling people I was working on this book, are you going to talk about City Slickers? Yes, I'll talk about City Slickers. Don't worry. But the dude ranch, you still see it in popular culture now and then. I think it was 2002. There was an episode of The Simpsons, Dude, Where's My Ranch? Which was very funny. There was an episode of Veep, the Julia Louis-Dreyfus show, where she had some college friends come to the White House, and they talked about, oh, remember the Dude Ranch? And that's all they say. So, it must have been something. I think there's still some Hallmark movies now and then that are set on dude ranches, and there's, been some, I think a lot of children's shows as well, but it just never really goes away. And one thing that always has been around is that every state had its own dude ranch association, and Nevada was no different. I think this brochure dates to about the 1930s. Dude ranching has always been incredibly important to tourism in the states that had dude ranches. And the reason that there are still dude ranches today, 140 years later, is because they're so adaptable. They've had to change. You go to a dude ranch today, it's not like it was in 1915, and all you do is ride a horse and maybe sing around the campfire at night and play bridge at night. Nobody would stay in business if that's the way they did their business today. And there still is every kind of dude ranch, from the most rustic, where you go and you help bring in the cattle, and maybe you sweep the floors, and there is that kind, all the way up to resorts that have farm to table programs and 5-star chefs and all kinds of activities. And I was at the Tucson Book Festival 2 weeks ago, and I stayed at the White Stallion Dude Ranch outside of Tucson, which is wonderful. And it's been around since 1965 and was a very traditional dude ranch for a long time. And today they offer archery, skeet shooting, they have a pool, they have a lot of activities that no dude rancher would have done, but they do this in order to give their guests what they want, But the core of the Dude Ranch never changes. There's always horseback riding. There's always Western decor. There's always really good food, and like hearty Western food. That's very, solid Western food. There's a piano and this is the white, they had all of this at White Stallion. There's a piano, in the main lodge. So there's this hybrid of, we want to give you guests, modern 21st century guests, what you want, but we know you're here because it's a Dude Ranch. So it has its higher end aspects, but I loved it. When I checked in, I dragged my suitcase over the gravel path to my cabin, and I came in and I put it up on the thing, and it not only had dust, but horsehair, on the wheels of my suitcase, which I just loved. You get out of the car, and the first thing you smell is horse manure. So you know where you are, and and that was okay. And that's why people go there, and they are booked all year long, all the time. And a lot of other Dude Ranches are the same. So I always say that people can travel geographically west, but they can really have an authentic experience by going to a Dude Ranch. And every Dude Rancher I have ever met and talked to, they're just wonderful, salt of the earth people. And I talked to quite a few during the pandemic, and some of them had to close, but a lot of them just changed the way they offered their activities. And quite a few ranchers told me they saw an uptick in guests during the pandemic because people could go to a Dude Ranch and spend their time outdoors where it was, safe. And they would do all kinds of protocols inside for social distancing or whatever. And a lot of people took their first Dude Ranch vacation in 2020, and then they rebooked for 2021 because they had such a wonderful time. It was their introduction to the Dude Ranch. But one rancher said to me, we're really grateful for the extra business, but the intimacy we've always had with our guests was gone because we had to have that distance because of the pandemic. And one of the things I say at the very beginning of the book is the difference between a hotel and a Dude Ranch. You go to a hotel, you never meet the hotel manager unless you need to complain about something. You go to a Dude Ranch, you're in that person's home. You're in that couple's home. Every day you're at a Dude Ranch, you see that owner. He comes and sits with you at dinner. He'll take the trail ride with you. She will, come out and play the piano for people in the lounge, at night. You see the people who run the place where you're staying, and you feel like you're a part of their home life. And that's another really wonderful, unique aspect of Dude Ranching that I really love. So before I end, I want to tell you my most favorite Hollywood Dude Ranch story. It was during my historic newspaper research, and I came across this headline from 1935, "Vampire to retire to Dude Ranch." Really? So the story was, Bela Lugosi gave an interview to a movie magazine in 1935. And they asked, what kind of ambitions do you have? And he told the reporter that his ambition was to open a Dude Ranch in the California Gold Rush country, next to the property owned by his very good friend, Cowboy star Buck Jones. Now, I happen to know that Buck Jones had a ranch near Susanville, but I'm thinking, this can't be right. So I tracked down Bela Lugosi's granddaughter, and she lives in LA. And I asked her, I said, I read the story, what's going on? And she said, well, let me talk to my dad. So she asked her father, Bela Lugosi Jr., and he said, no. Although their father loved the outdoors, he also, who knew, had a great sense of humor, and he was messing with the movie magazine. Completely messing with him. Can you imagine how tired he was of being asked these kind of questions? But guess what he picked as a way to play a joke on the magazine? He picked the Dude Ranch. Probably something that nobody would ever associate with him. But in 1935, it was the place to go. And that's one of my favorite stories, one of many in the book. And thank you very, very much for coming tonight. Thank you. This is the shameless self-promotion slide, part of the program. We unfortunately were not able to get books to the museum in time for tonight. I know, I'm very sorry. It's just bureaucracy and whatever. And it's certainly not the museum's fault at all. So, But you can reach me on my website, lynndowney.com. It's available on Amazon. If you want a signed copy, write to me at my website. I'm happy to send you a signed copy with a commemorative bookmark. But I'm also happy to entertain questions if anybody has questions. Yes.
When you mentioned that you come to, and then they would come and get you.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you got to the border or the where the ranch starts, they bring you in a buckboard.
Very early, yes, they would. Early on, oh yes. And as soon as they could, they would get, automobiles. But, often there were not paved roads between the railroad station and the dude ranch. So it could be quite the rickety ride. You really had to want to go to a dude ranch in those days because you'd have this long train trip. I mean, the Valley Ranch in Cody was a good 30 miles outside of Cody on an unpaved road. And then they finally did pave it and you could take a car, but it was still a trek. So it was definitely, yeah, you really needed to want to go. Absolutely part of the experience. Anybody else?
Who was your graphic artist? Because they got the touch of like 1930s in there.
This is artwork from a 1948 railroad brochure. My publisher is University of Oklahoma Press. They're wonderful. Their art department is amazing. And they found that I sent them a lot of images, and there are pictures in the book as well. And they thought this was perfect. So they tweaked the artwork a little bit so it would work as a book cover. But that is original art from a railroad brochure. So I really like it a lot. Yes.
So that recipe, the cowboy sack.
Yeah. Cowboy in a sack. Yeah.
So one of the first ingredients, what is that?
Sargam, it looks like sorghum, but my grandmother, who's from Arkansas, always called it sargam. It's a grain that you can turn into like a corn syrup. So, and it's kind of brownish, and it's a sweet, it's like Karo syrup or something.
No, what is that you're making? Is it like a bread?
It's like how do I explain it? Who can explain an English boiled pudding? I mean, you make it in a coffee can, and it's kind of like a soft fruit cake. Kind of like a brown bread. So it's carvable, but it's still kind of soft.
It's like tiramisu.
It's a little creamy, a little tougher than tiramisu. Yeah. But it's kind of like a fruit cake that isn't kind of like bread pudding. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you could cut it. You could also just eat it with a spoon. Yeah. I haven't tried it. I kind of like to try it, but I'm kind of scared. So find a coffee can to make it in, but anybody else?
Thank you.
Oh, certainly. Thank you again so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank it out to you as well. Thank you.